Galway Public Libraries welcome you to this year's Galway's Great Read, titled Westward Ho, a Ramble Through Galway, 1840 to 1950. The Great Read programme promotes our literary heritage, unique culture and history, and fosters an appreciation for its diversity and richness. This year, our programme is centred around the work of three travel writers, husband and wife team, Anna Maria Hall and Samuel, who visited County Galway several times prior to the Great Famine. Sir William Wilde, an extraordinarily interesting and intellectual man who wrote in the 1860s. And Richard Hayward, an actor, singer and musician turned travel writer, who explored the highways and byways of the county between the 1930s and the 1940s. We hope you enjoy this series of talks for Galway's Great Read 2021, Westward Ho, a Ramble Through Galway, 1840-1950.
Thank you very much, Joe. We are delighted to welcome our guest today, Anne Hodge, Curator of Prints and Drawings at the National Gallery of Ireland. Anne is a graduate of the National College of Art and Design and University College Dublin. Since joining the team in the National Gallery in 2001, she has worked on many wonderful exhibitions, such as in 2013, From Galway to Leenane, Perspectives on Landscape and Trove. In 2014, a collaboration between the Gallery, Emma, and the Crawford Art Gallery, Cork. She has also been responsible for the Munch and Leonardo da Vinci exhibitions in the gallery. Her research interests include printmaking in Ireland, photography, landscape drawing, and the history of collecting. Anne's talk is titled William Evans of Eton's Galway Watercolours and 19th Century Travel Writing. Evans' work complemented Samuel and Anna Maria Hall's travelogue, Ireland, Its Scenery, Character, etc., published in the early 1840s. We hope you enjoy.
William Evans of Eton's Watercolours of Galway and Conamara and 19th Century Travel Writing. My name is Anne Hodge. I'm Curator of Prints and Drawings at the National Gallery of Ireland, and I'll be speaking to you over the next 45 minutes or so about these beautiful watercolours which are in the National Gallery of Ireland's collection. Before I go into any detail on the drawings, I'd just like to give you a bit of context and background. So interest in the western parts of Ireland, in particular Galway and Conamara, grew rapidly in the early decades of the 19th century. And this interest was fed by a variety of guidebooks and travel memoirs. The consumers of such publications were from the well-educated, middle and upper classes, people who had the means and inclination to travel, or at least read about others' experiences of travel. Aileen Agnew, in her review of 19th century travel books, and this was published in as part of a larger book, the Irish Book in English, 1800 to 91, was published in 2011. She outlines the key reasons for the burgeoning interest in travel writing about Ireland in the early 19th century. The Napoleonic Wars, which closed continental Europe to British tourists, encouraged exploration of lesser-known locations closer to home. Politically, there was an anxiety to integrate Ireland into the new United Kingdom. This was post-Act of Union. And there was a general romantic interest in scenic, wild landscapes. And Agnew quotes, this is a quote from Agnew, alongside such romantic delight in Ireland's seemingly primordial landscape was the converse desire to improve its condition and consolidate its connection with Britain. It seemed that Ireland, like the rest of the empire, must be made known and tractable. And that's a word you'll come across regularly in these 19th century travel books, improving, and also in the political discourse of the time. Everyone was very keen to improve Ireland, to make use of its natural resources, and so on. And so that's the very sort of colonial background to these drawings and, of course, Hall's Ireland. Now, the first formal travel guide to Ireland, which included detailed descriptions of Conamara, was a book called Ireland in 1834, which was published the following year by London-based author Henry D. Inglis. Conamara also featured prominently in Ireland, its scenery, character, etc., published between 1840 and 1843, and it was known as Hall's Ireland. It was a 3-volume set, and the authors were Irish-born but staunchly Unionist. They were a husband and wife team, Anna and Samuel Carter Hall. And you'll see in the images there, the copies, so they're very large volumes. You wouldn't really be bringing them around in your suitcase on your trip. You would have, perused this book, read through it before you undertook a tour of Ireland. And the book is copiously illustrated with these wood engravings, and you see one down there in the corner. It shows the Spanish art. We look at such engravings in a little more detail. And then on the right, you can see the title page for the book, again, wood engraved, and this time it was done by Daniel MacLeese, who was a very well-known artist, Irish artist who was based in London. So it was a sort of a luxury publication, if you like, heavily illustrated, and became very popular and went through many different editions. So wood engraved illustrations became a very important part of travel books from the 1840s. Black and white images translated from drawings made in the field by competent artists and draftsmen complemented the written descriptions of writers, including people like the Halls. And such images gave a sense of reality to the armchair traveller's experience of the places that were described, and also the images added to the saleability of the books by widening their general appeal. And on the screen, you can see at the top left, that's just a wood block. The blocks that were used for wood engraving were generally fruit woods. They were very hard. And then the artist would gouge the image into the wood using these very dangerous looking tools underneath. And there you can see an image of a wood engraver working away. Often these wood engravers worked at home. So they brought the drawing they were copying from, their pieces of wood and so on. And they worked sometimes by candlelight, by lamplight, oil lamp here. It was very close work, very time consuming. And yet there were hundreds and hundreds of these wood engravings producing work for publications such as Hall's Ireland. Now, another travel book I'm going to mention, although unillustrated, apart from maps, is Henry D. Inglis's 2-volume Guide to Ireland, which was called A Journey Throughout Ireland During the Spring, Summer and Autumn of 1834. And this was really influential in terms of travel writing on Ireland. He described the routes and places of interest, but also, very importantly, commented on the social and political situation in Ireland. And the style and format of his work was embraced by other writers who followed in his wake. His enthusiastic observations on Galway and Mayo and Conamara take up 4 chapters, and although his tone is patronising at times, overall he provides much detail on the life and customs of the Gaelic-speaking inhabitants of those areas of the country. He was shocked by the poverty he saw everywhere, and his final paragraph states that he had not studied to make it an agreeable book so much as a useful book. There is little real cause for jocularity in treating the condition of a starving people. And Inglis's book would have been an invaluable guide for contemporary travellers. And it's very likely that the drawing master, William Evans, was armed with this book when he set off on his first sketching trip to the west of Ireland in 1835. And Inglis's book was published in that very year. So Evans, he grew up at Eton College near Windsor, of course, the famous public school for boys. And he took on the role of drawing master at the school when his father, Samuel, retired in 1823. Evans, the young Evans, was a very accomplished watercolorist and became a member of the Society of Painters in Watercolour, which was later known as the Old Watercolor Society in 1830. Like the Irish painter Frederick William Burton, who he actually knew and invited to visit and paint at Eton much later in 1862, Evans painted exclusively in watercolours throughout his career. From the 1820s, during the summer when the school was closed, Evans went on painting trips throughout Scotland and England. And as we know, in 1835 and also in 1838, he came to Ireland. And just on the screen there, you might get a sense of the type of work he was doing and how the people would have seen it when he exhibited his works at the Old Watercolor Society. The watercolours were framed up in very elaborate gilt frames, like you see in the bottom corner there, and they were very expensive. And I just wanted to show you another Irish scene. This is a finished view of Lismore, which was actually owned by Queen Victoria. In order to come up with a finished watercolour like you're looking at this, like the type you're looking at on the screen there, Evans did many sketches, first of all. And there's a sketchbook in a private collection, which is filled with quick pencil sketches, like the one you see on your screen, of scenery on the west coast of Ireland. And this shows very clearly that Evans first visited this country in the summer of 1835. And these are very simple studies, some with white highlights, and they depict Achill, Clare Island and Delphi, so that area of sort of North Conamara and beyond. And this visit was a very valuable one for Evans, as in the following year, he exhibited 5 finished watercolours of the west of Ireland at the Watercolour Society's prestigious annual exhibition in London. And all 5 sold for between 30 and 35 guineas. And one, an Irish peasant girl, was bought by the Bishop of Winchester. So he had very sort of well-to-do patrons. Just to give you a sense of how expensive they were, so 30 to 35 guineas. In 1835 or so, a school teacher, schoolmaster, his annual wage or salary would have been £80. And then someone higher up in the hierarchy, maybe a government official or a clergyman, perhaps like the Bishop of Winchester, they would have been earning about £250 a year at this time. So those paintings were very, very expensive, and it was only the well-to-do that could afford it. 2 of the watercolours which he sold in that year, 1836, were called The Cladda and Buttermilk Lane, and the actual titles, the exact titles, incorporate direct quotations from Henry Inglis's guidebook, which alludes to both the importance of this book to Evans and also its general importance in opening up the West to public interest. Now, spurred on probably by the positive reception that his Irish views received, in 1837, Evans showed 9 finished views of scenes around Mam, Renville and Killary. And number 133 in the catalogue, Inn on the Road to Westport, County Mayo, sold for 25 guineas to a man called T.G. Parry. And Thomas Gambier Parry is an important name in relation to this collection of drawings, because he was a wealthy young orphan who had been Evans's star pupil before he graduated from Eton in 1832. And this young man, Parry, acquired the large group of drawings, 41 drawings of Galway and Conamara, which Evans had made in 1838. The landscapes and figure studies, and we look at them in more detail later on, remained in the Parry family until 2008. And then they were acquired by the National Gallery of Ireland, and they've been in the collection since. In 2013, I put them on display in an exhibition, and I do hope to publish a book on the drawings at some point in the not too distant future. So Evans's watercolours, they present an idyllic vision of Galway City and the Conamara landscape. This magnificent view of Buttermilk Lane, it just gives you the sense, well, throughout his watercolours, the sun is shining in almost all of the views and the watercolours are vivid. When I first viewed the works in 2008, I was a little bit suspicious of the romantic looking scenery, and I felt that Evans must have used a large dollop of artistic license in creating his watercolours. However, I went on a research trip to Conamara in the summer of 2012 in search of the viewpoints and the actual locations he painted. And when I was able to find the actual viewpoint, I realized that he recorded the topography and the mountainous landscape very, very accurately. And the profiles of the mountains are absolutely exact and very recognizable. And I do have to pay tribute to Michael Gibbons, the Clifton-based archaeologist, who was incredibly helpful in helping me find out the locations of Evans's drawings. And this is another view, so a landscape view of the road from Leenane going out towards, well, Letterfrack eventually. And you see Killary Harbour on the right-hand side there. And this just gives you a sense of, you know, the sun always shining, but again, the very accurate mountains in the distance. And I will return to this watercolour later in the talk. Just have a look at the man in the corner there sitting against the wall. We'll revisit that later on. So despite the fact that the landscapes are, you know, very accurate, in order to understand the artworks fully, it's very important to bear in mind that Evans was a middle-class Englishman painting for a very particular purpose: to create beautiful watercolours that would appeal to middle-class English buyers and patrons. The landscape is rendered very accurately, but I wondered if his depictions of the inhabitants of the landscape were as true to life. Almost without exception, the people he records look well-dressed and well-fed. Similar to the John Hine postcards we're all familiar with from the 70s and even the 60s, Evans's figures, often wearing eye-catching red skirts, are strategically placed to enhance a composition or draw the eye across the picture plane. And this is a good case in point. You see the woman on the horse there in the beautiful red clothing. Now that was a traditional red madder dye that was used a lot, along with a blue and indigo as well. So, you know, that is true to life, but at the same time, it's interesting to wonder about the figures. Now, there is a very long tradition of landscape painting, of using human figures. Sometimes it was called staffage, simply to add interest to a view. And often these figures are roughly sketched in, as is the case in this watercolour here. And sometimes they're drawn from the artist's imagination rather than from real life. Now, it's impossible really to be sure, but it's likely that some of the figures in Evans's watercolours are types rather than actual people that he met and recorded. However, on the other side, there are sheets of sketches of his Irish drawings that do appear to have been drawn directly from life, particularly sheets like this, sheets of multiple observational studies of people in the market in Galway City. And these studies are full of energy and a sense of being there. They are people Evans saw, there's no question. The detail, he's interested in how the women wear their cloaks. Sometimes they're rolled up around their shoulders, sometimes the hood is up. And there's just a real sense of reality about this image. Despite this, none of the figures he depicts appear to be malnourished, sick, or in tattered clothing. They all look fairly well in terms of clothing. And newspaper reports of the time are really, they paint a very different picture. And this is just another example of those observational studies. And I just want to quote from a newspaper of the time. This is a quote from the Kilkenny Journal and Leinster Commercial and Literary Advertiser of 7th of September 1833, so 5 years before Evans was in the West. And this newspaper article reports on the need to reform the systems of tolls and taxes in Ireland. And in a report headed Toll Reform Bill, it outlines the unfairness of the toll system. And I quote, "Every poor person bringing brooms to Galway market is stopped on the west bridge of that town and compelled to yield up a portion of their miserable stock, pretence of toll or custom. The great majority of the poor creatures who struggle to eke out a scanty subsistence in this way are, we understand, females, who barefoot and nearly half naked traverse the mountains and wilds at a distance of several miles from their wretched hovels, pull with their hands the heath which they afterwards seek to convert into pittance for the support of their starving families. No wonder that all classes should rejoice in the downfall of a monopoly so meanly voracious as to stoop to such paltry pickings." So I suppose you just have to bear in mind, what was being reported over these years in the 1830s with the images we're looking at by William Evans of Eton. Evans's images, in contrast to the description of the women who were coming down from the mountainous areas with their brooms that they'd made themselves out of heather and tied together and were being taxed so heavily. So these people are, in Galway, probably selling their produce. You can see a basket of something green, it could be apples. Although maybe August 17th could be apples, we're not sure. Anyway, these drawings, the people don't appear desperate. Certainly they're very tired. They probably walked a long distance into the city in order to sell their wares, but they're not in rags, and they look pretty well clothed. So just wanted to bring that aspect to your attention. So the western part of Ireland suffered the vicissitudes of famine and food shortage regularly during the late 18th and early 19th century. So the Great Famine of 1847 was really just the culmination of many, many regular famines in the decades leading up to it. A report in the Freeman's Journal of the 20th of November 1838, which describes Daniel O'Connell's visit to Galway just 3 months after Evans's trip, gives a good sense of what the true situation of much of the rural population at that time. And just while I give you this quote, which is in somewhat purple prose, but this was the style of the time, the article does illustrate how deprived the people were. And I quote, this is from the Freeman's Journal of November 1838. As he passed along the road to Claren Bridge, the peasantry were congregated on the highway, wherever he was expected, and cheered him heartily and warmly as he passed by. It was a delightful evening. The winds were hushed, and the clouds which covered the sky were tinged with the richest lines by the setting sun. In the midst of that scene of nature's glories, how different was the aspect presented by the wretched inhabitants of the lovely country. Lean and haggard and clothed in rags, they seemed like the natives of a wilderness as they ran across the fields from their hard toil to get a glimpse of the great man who was passing. And just as I was speaking there, the image you're looking at is a lithograph, a hand-coloured lithograph by Haverty. He was an artist who recorded this event, and it's just to give you a sense of the fact that people came. This is the monster meeting in Clifton in 1843, so a little later, but it gives you that sense of people coming from all parts of the country to try and get a glimpse of O'Connell, or to try and hear what he said. Given the reasons why Evans was painting his views of Conamara and Galway, it's not surprising that he didn't include any figures who seemed to be in distress or suffering severe want. A number of his drawings were used by the Halls to illustrate their chapters on Mayo and Galway in the 3rd volume of their travel book. It's not known how Anna and Samuel Carter Hall came to know William Evans. Their book is a composite of accounts of various tours they undertook between 1825 and 1840. So I think it's important to realise that it wasn't all written in one go after one big trip around the country, but things were gathered over a number of years. They might have met Evans while they were touring and asked if they could use some of his sketches to illustrate their forthcoming book. Or alternatively, they might have just been familiar with his Irish watercolours through the exhibitions in London. It's possible that they asked him to provide sketches to illustrate particular passages that they had written, but it's very unlikely that he actually accompanied them on their tour of Conamara. If he had, it's very likely they would have mentioned this in the text, because they did mention this another artist, F.W. Fairholt, who worked for them. And a description of the scene they witnessed, or a scene they witnessed on the shores of Killary at the village of Bundurra, as they called it, where people gathered to watch fishermen landing a large catch of salmon. that entry is accompanied by a wood engraving, and a footnote on the page states that the scene was rapidly sketched by Mr. Fairholt from our boat in front of the group and is a strict representation of the scene without any artistic making up. And the Halls were very keen throughout their book to underline the truthfulness and accuracy of the drawings, which enlivened their texts. And volume 3 includes 217 wood engraved prints, so a huge number. And these were after drawings by various artists, including very well-known Irish artists like Andrew Nichol, also W.H. Bartlett, and Fairholt, who is English, who we mentioned just a minute ago. 20 are by William Evans, and they include both small vignettes of places referred to in the text and also full-page panoramas, which were tipped in landscape format with a little bit of tissue over them in the actual book. And just on the screen there, you can see Buttermilk Lane, again, the beautiful sunny watercolor done by Evans, accurately drawn in terms of the buildings and so on. And then the wood engraved version, so copied from the original watercolor. And you can see a few things have changed slightly. So the engraver has taken a little bit of license, and that's fairly normal in this where they work from drawings done in the field, if you like. So many of the figure drawings in the volume, despite the fact that the Halls were saying the illustrations were so accurate, some of the images of women are really very idealized, and we'll see that in just a moment. There's an image by William Harvey. That's the image you're looking at on the left. It's titled Delphi Girls, and supposedly it depicts the young women who herded sheep around the area of Linan and that general area, Delphi. But the image shows elegant women in Grecian style dress, complete with pottery vessels on their heads. They wouldn't look out of place in Delphi in Greece. So this kind of idealization could be down to the wood engravers, in this case, a Miss Clark. And yet sometimes the images weren't so idealized, and certainly Evans's images are more realistic, it seems. His image of a woman knitting is shown just in the center there. That's his original watercolor, a woman knitting. Of course, knitting was a very important work that women in the area did at the time to earn money. And the translation, the wood engraved translation, is there just beside. Now it's a bit changed. I do think it's based on that drawing, even though the woman is now holding a child in her arms as well as knitting. So she's multitasking. Generally, the wood engravers employed by the Halls did take liberties. And then just another case in point is this image of the Spanish Arch. Now, I'm just showing you a very small detail of the Evans watercolor. I will show you a larger version later on, but I'm just zoning in on the women here. So they're engaged in conversation. They're waiting for a boat of turf to be unloaded. And then on the right, you can see the wood engraved translation. And it's quite different. The women have sort of metamorphosed into elegant ladies, with the woman in the center, fashionable décolletage. So she has this lovely off the shoulder dress. And she wouldn't look out of place in a London drawing room, perhaps. So you can see again, the wood engravings aren't completely accurate, and there is some license taken here. So I said that Evans didn't really look so much at the difficulties of the people or their the hardship they were undergoing, but this is a drawing which does illustrate the difficult living conditions, and it accompanies the Hall's description of the village of Tully. And I quote, "The neighbourhood exhibits many tokens of poverty. Witness one of the dwellings, in which human beings bring up their families. It was pictured from nature by William Evans. So Evans was here, saw the scene and sketched it, and then it was translated into a wood engraving that you're looking at on the screen. Now, I think perhaps this isn't a full-time dwelling. It's possibly a booley site, because Evans did show, and this is a very beautiful watercolor of a booley site. That's one of the 41 drawings in the National Gallery collection. The people, of course, in Conamara, in the mountainous areas, they practiced transhumans, which meant that animals were brought up into the uplands to graze in the summer months. And they would have been young, often the younger people would have gone up with the animals. They would have lived in temporary dwellings for a number of weeks at a time. And these are very roughly constructed houses. Here you can see they're just built into kind of a bank or a cleft. I'll just show you a slightly more close-up version of that image. So you can see perhaps the house on the right there, there's just a kind of a dark hole, which was the entry point. There's no chimney. The roof is very roughly made from bits of bracken and whatever was there, branches. And the smoke, there's no chimney, so the smoke just comes out whatever holes there are, so in through the doorway, if you like, or through holes in the roof. And now we'll move on to another wood engraving. So this again is based on a drawing by Evans. So on page 489 and 490 of the Hall's book, they wax lyrical about the beauties of the landscape in the vicinity of Killary Fjord. And they advise that some idea of the area's peculiar character may be formed from, and I quote, "this copy of the sketch by Mr. Evans. It exhibits the beach and the immediate headlands with the low hut of the fisherman nestling among the crags. But to render justice to this glorious scenery is impossible, either by his pencil or our pen." And the wood engraved vignette is very similar to a watercolor by Evans, which I'll show you now, which bears an inscription in pencil: "Fishing huts between Renville and Island." And here you can see the way the buildings, it's quite amazing. They're built into the bank of sand and they're quite low to the ground. This image probably shows Lettergesh Beach. And you can see the curraghs brought up onto the sand. In the sort of middle distance to the left, you can see a small settlement or Clochon, and then the mountain on the horizon line, if you like, is Tully Mountain, I think. So it's pretty accurate rendering of that part of the coastline. And I just want to show you another drawing very similar that Evans did. And this isn't part of that group of 41. This is a watercolor which was gifted to the gallery just quite recently. And I think it shows the same area. You can see the little settlement in the background again, similar house built up on the beach, and similar, we can see the mountain again in the background. It's slightly different angle, or perhaps a different house. But this is a finished watercolor that is in a beautiful gilded frame. It's quite small, but it's very detailed. So it shows that from the rough sketches, Evans would have made a lot of, or not a lot, but a number of finished works from the original sketches. And then just another great view. This is a view of the Glen Cohen Horseshoe, that circle, if you like, of mountains to the west of Lough Corrib. And this illustrates Evans's mastery really at capturing the subtle colours of the Conamara landscape, and also his interest in accurately describing the shapes of the individual mountains and also the simple dwellings of the people. So this watercolour is taken from a vantage point at the southern end of the valley, and you can see there's a stream in the foreground. Basically, it's the view you'd see if you were driving along the N59 towards Galway from Clifton, I suppose. You can see in the centre the dark mass of Bindove, and it's partly obscured by cloud. it dominates the composition really. And then to the right, you can see Ben Cor, and a small settlement of houses then is visible in the foreground. There's some interesting details. On the far left, you can see a raised garden or garry, and this was used to grow potatoes and other vegetables for the use of the family. The other fields were often used for oats and things, and they were sold to pay rent more likely than not. And just I'll quickly go through a few other drawings by Evans from the same group, which show his interest in trying to depict accurately the homes, the landscape of the people. And this is a very simple work. It's a graphite drawing, then with wash additions. What's interesting is there's lots of pencil inscriptions. Down at the bottom left, you can see Mam. So this is a drawing taken in the Mam Valley. You can see to the left of the house, there's a little pencil scribble, and it actually says oats. And then to the right of the house, you have the inscription potatoes. So he's indicating the different crops that were grown near the house. And then on the mountain, the word blue is written. So that shows that he would have drawn just in pencil in monochrome, and then later added in the color. And these were notes to himself. And many artists did this, the little aide memoir. Another house, this is probably near where the Bundurka River flows into the Killary. We're not exactly sure. And you can see there's people walking with an animal, a cow, down into towards the water. But the house itself, I mean, it's really very rough. The thatch needs redoing. There's weeds growing in the thatch, and you can see the smoke just coming out from the windows and from the roof. It would have been incredibly smoky and dark inside, and yet it was shelter. And this is how many people lived at the time, as you know. This is a detail of a watercolor we looked at earlier in the talk, and I said to have a look at that man who was sitting up against the rocks. And I think he's of interest because it could indicate, this could show a man who's for hire. Men in this area who had no work themselves would hire themselves out by the day, and they'd bring their own shovel. And I just show in the top corner there a work by a different artist. This is Samuel Tuggood Rock. And in the 1820s, he did this drawing of men in County Waterford, spalpeens for hire. So possibly this is a spalpeen that Evans has witnessed on the road from Leenane. It's an amazing rock, an erratic rock with its, which I haven't been able to actually spot. I don't know whether it still exists. Now, for the last few minutes, I'll just focus on some of the drawings of Galway City. Evans's drawing focused on notable parts of the city. We've looked at Buttermilk Lane already, and you can see the wood engraving on the right. The wood engraving is on page 452 of the book. And the authors, the Halls, draw attention to the fact that most of the engravings which appear in the section on Galway are based on Evans's work. And I quote, "The examples we give were selected almost at random by Mr. Evans of Eton, to whom we are indebted for the majority of the illustrations which ornament this portion of our work. We are fortunate in having obtained the cooperation of so accomplished an artist, and lament that the beauty of his coloured drawings cannot be satisfactorily transferred to our pages by the aid of wood engraving." And I'll just show you here. This is another view in the city, another archway, which seems to be gone now. The text starts talking about the Claddagh, so perhaps it was an entryway near the Claddagh, but I haven't been able to track it down. And if any of you have knowledge of, or if any of these images spark your interest, or you feel you know where they are, do please get in touch, because the research is ongoing. And then, so you can see how the wood engraver has changed things slightly, added in a woman with a child and a little and another figure, and changed things just a little. So again, not exactly as Evans had drawn it. And again, the full image of the Spanish Arch, a very beautiful painting. And in the background there, you can see very clearly the Claddagh or not very clearly, but you can make out the claddagh, all the closely packed thatched houses. And Inglis, who was the book that Evans probably used, he gives a very detailed account of this unique fishing settlement in his book. He noted that about 1,700 fishermen lived in the Baile with their wives and children. And I quote from Inglis here, "I looked into hundreds of cabins, and there was scarcely one in which I did not see the females busily engaged in spinning, making, or mending nets. These they make not only for use, but for sale." And you can just imagine, you know, this English man poking his head into the doors of these houses as the people were trying to work and were busy. And here we have another image of the interior of a house. Now, we're not sure, is this the claddagh, but it's very likely is. You can see the woman there with her spinning wheel, her daughter. They have it rigged up into the rafters of the roof to get the flax thread to come down properly. And then in the background, you can see a one of the traditional baskets for holding the flax that has been spun. And these people are relatively well off. You can see there's a good big dresser in the corner, well filled with delf. So they're not in a bad way. Unusually, the door is a full door with a keyhole, which is you'd expect to see a half door here in a house like this. But in any case, it does show Evans interested in recording the lifestyle of the people who lived in this part of Ireland. And his enthusiasm and curiosity, I suppose, and his determination to record clearly and accurately the beauty of the landscape, the homes of the people, and the traditional way of life is very clearly visible in the drawings we've looked at over the last while. The Halls believed that the involvement of Evans, an accomplished English artist who had exhibited his views of Conamara at prestigious London exhibitions, would add benefit to their third volume. Their aim, of course, was to encourage English visitors to visit Ireland and to illustrate the benefits of political union between the two countries. In their weighty volumes, the Halls demonstrate the necessity of the union through scientific methods, and this was done through footnotes and quotations from official documents. But they also used literary anecdotes and the beautiful illustrations like the ones we've been looking at. And they were designed to appeal to the romantic sensibilities of Victorian readers. And whether he was aware of it or not, Evans's watercolours aided the Hall's ideological purpose to justify the union between Ireland and Britain. And despite the fact that his works appeared in a popular travel journal, Evans never again exhibited Conamara or Galway scenes at the Old Watercolor Society or any other public venues, although he did continue exhibiting his work well into old age. And he remained drawing master at Eton College until 1853, when his son Samuel took over the role. And I leave it there. As I said, if you have any information that you'd like to pass on to me in terms of the imagery, the works that are seen, I'd be very interested to hear. And also, the whole set of works can be viewed by appointment in the National Gallery of Ireland. So you can make an appointment. Things are a little bit difficult with COVID, but in the coming months, it'll be easier to come in and make an appointment. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, so much for an insightful and enjoyable talk.